Think about your day in security or IT, and how much of it is driven by little messages on a screen. A syslog line here, a crowd audit event there, a burst of alerts from an endpoint tool right when you are trying to get actual work done. It can feel like your environment is shouting in fragments. Today, we are going to slow that down and treat those fragments as parts of a story. How security logs, events, and alerts help you explain what really happened. This narration is part of the Tuesday Insights feature from Bare Metal Cyber magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber.
At the heart of this topic is a simple idea. Logs are the raw diary entries your systems write as they go about their day. Events are those entries interpreted into meaningful actions. Alerts are the small set of those actions that someone or something thinks you should pay attention to right now. You can picture three layers stacked on top of the same reality. At the bottom, everything gets recorded. In the middle, activity is summarized. At the top, potential problems are raised for review. Once you see those layers, your tools and dashboards start to make a lot more sense. It is important to separate this pattern from any single product name. A security information and event management platform is not the story itself. It is one of the places where logs are collected and turned into events and alerts. An endpoint detection console is not the story either. It is one camera angle on what is happening on your hosts. The real story is how all of these pieces connect across identity, network, endpoint, cloud, and applications. Logs, events, and alerts are just different views of that same shared reality. In most environments, the process begins with log producers. Operating systems, firewalls, identity providers, cloud services, web applications, and endpoint agents all write records about what they are doing. Those records might be traditional syslog messages, structured JSON payloads, Windows event entries, or vendor-specific formats. Collectors and agents scoop them up and send them to a central place. At this stage, the job is not to decide good or bad. The job is simply to capture enough detail that someone can ask better questions later.
Once the logs arrive, the next step is to turn free-form text into structured events. Parsing rules pull out the actors, actions, times, and places. Different log formats that represent the same behavior can be mapped into a common shape. A user login, an administrator creating a new key, or a firewall allowing a connection can all become well-defined event types rather than mysterious strings of text. This is where the system moves from "we stored a line" to "we know what actually happened in the real world."
On top of those events, detection logic decides when to raise an alert. Sometimes that logic is simple. Too many failed logins in a short period, a new admin account created outside of business hours, or a large amount of data leaving a sensitive network. Sometimes it is more advanced, connecting behaviors over time or across many users and systems. Either way, when conditions are met, the platform produces an alert and sends it into a queue, a ticket, or a chat channel for a human to review. This is the point where the story demands attention. A short example brings the pipeline to life. Imagine an attacker who guesses a user's password from the internet. The identity provider records several failed logins, followed by a success from a new location. A virtual private network gateway logs a connection from that account. A web application logs unusual access to an admin page. An endpoint tool logs an odd process starting up. Separately, these are just 4 or 5 lines buried in different systems. With a working pipeline, they become a single alert about a possible account takeover with follow-on activity, and a human can follow the thread step by step. In everyday work, you use this pattern more than you may realize. When something breaks in production, you look at logs and events around the time it started and ask what changed. When a suspicious alert appears about outbound traffic, you pivot into firewall records, name resolution logs, and endpoint data to see whether it is a misconfiguration or a real exfiltration attempt. The logs provide the raw material. Events give you context. Alerts tell you where to start. This is true for both traditional incident response and basic troubleshooting. There are also straightforward quick wins that even small or resource-constrained teams can chase. One of the most effective is to focus on 3 workflows: user logins, admin actions, and changes to critical systems. If you make sure those areas are well logged, consistently normalized, and covered by simple alerts, you immediately improve your ability to explain what happened after a problem. You do not need an elaborate hunting program to benefit from this. You just need enough coverage to tell a basic story about who did what, where, and when.
As organizations mature, they use the same logs, events, and alerts for more strategic work. Threat hunters rely on deep data to look for subtle patterns of attacker behavior over weeks or months. Audit and compliance teams use event timelines to show that controls are being followed, approvals are captured, and access is managed properly. Operations teams combine performance metrics with security events to spot recurring misconfigurations or fragile systems. The more familiar you become with the data, the easier it is to see common plot lines that keep reappearing in different forms. When you treat all this data as a story engine, the benefits stack up. Clarity is the first one. It becomes much easier to move from something odd is happening to this account on this system took these actions over this time window. That level of detail is what responders, engineers, and leaders all need to make decisions. Another benefit is reuse. Once you have clean logs and well-defined events, you can answer new questions without redesigning your data flow. You can add new detections, support new audits, and run new investigations on top of the same foundation.
There are trade-offs, and they are worth acknowledging. Collecting and storing large amounts of log data costs money. Parsing and normalizing it takes time and skill. Tuning detections so that alerts are meaningful requires ongoing care. If you store too little data, you might save money but lose crucial context in an investigation. If you tighten alerts too much, you might avoid noise but miss weak early signals. If you rely too heavily on a single platform, a mistake in that platform's configuration can create a blind spot you do not notice until it matters most. It also helps to be honest about the limits. No matter how good your pipeline is, you will never capture everything. Some systems will be slow to onboard. Some logs will be lower quality than you would like. Clock skew and time zone confusion will occasionally blur timelines. Marketing might promise a single pane of glass, but real environments stay messy. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to be good enough that most of the time, for the events that matter, you can reconstruct a believable and verifiable story. Understanding the common failure modes can keep you out of trouble. One of the biggest is shallow capture, where key systems are barely logged or not logged at all. In that world, an alert might tell you that something suspicious happened, but you lack the details to know who was involved or what data was touched. Another failure mode is inconsistent normalization, where similar behaviors are represented in many slightly different ways. That makes correlation rules fragile and pushes analysts back to manual sleuthing with ad hoc searches. Alert fatigue is another serious problem. If every minor anomaly leads to an alert, queues grow faster than people can work them. Analysts start ignoring notifications or skimming quickly, and important signals get lost in the noise. Flashy dashboards can contribute to the problem if they look impressive but are not tied to real decisions. In these environments, it is common to hear phrases like, "We think this is what happened," because nobody can trace a clear, evidence-based timeline from start to finish. Healthy environments feel different. During an investigation, people can quickly list which systems to check and which events will answer the basic questions. They can say which accounts were involved, which systems were touched, and which data might be at risk. After incidents, they can produce a straightforward timeline that connects actions across identity, network, endpoint, and application views. Over time, recurring story patterns are recognized, and those insights drive changes in architecture, processes, or training.
You can also hear health in the way teams talk about their data. Analysts refer to specific event types and fields rather than generic stuff in the logs. Engineers know what their services must emit and verify that those records appear in downstream tools. Leaders receive summaries that read like short narratives with clear evidence instead of vague technical blur. All of this points to an environment where logs, events, and alerts are not just collected out of obligation, but actively used to support better decisions.
At its core, this topic is about turning scattered technical records into trustworthy security narratives. When you have a functioning pipeline from raw logs to structured events to meaningful alerts, you can answer the question, what actually happened, with much more confidence. You respond faster, you learn more from each incident, and you can communicate risk in language that connects with both technical and non-technical audiences. The same data that once felt like chaos becomes a shared source of truth. As you think about your own environment, the key question is not whether you own a particular platform or follow a specific vendor's model. The key question is whether you can tell clear stories about important actions using the data you collect today. If the answer is sometimes or not really, the path forward is usually to improve coverage around key workflows, clean up normalization, and tune alerts so they support human judgment instead of overwhelming it. Over time, each improvement makes the next investigation a little easier. The next time something strange happens on your network or in your cloud account, try viewing your tools through this lens. Treat the logs as chapters, the events as scenes, and the alerts as the notes in the margin telling you where to look. If the story feels incomplete, that is useful information about where to invest next. If the story comes together cleanly, you will feel the difference in how quickly you can move from confusion to understanding. That is the real value of turning raw security data into a story you can trust.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.